It's Saturday, baby.
Hello everyone, we're Saturday Night Sellswords Productions. Today we're presenting how to be a DM for beginners. My name's Blake, I'm the main editor behind our channel. This is
Jamie, nice to meet you.
My name is Lewis, I'm the resident Cobalt.
That he is. He is a fantastic Cobalt, always amusing. So this panel is, as I state with the title, is primarily just otherwise you have very low experience DMing, maybe you want to brush up some basics, or you have no idea how to do it, but you're interested. We'll give you some basic rules to live by on this, some tools that are in your toolbox per se, and a few other things. So if there's only one thing you get from this, and this is probably the most important rule for any DM, and I see someone shaking their head going, yeah, it's not you versus the players. You represent the enemies, yes, but you also represent the allies. The gods of evil and good, the townspeople, the damsel in distress, the monsters, the villains. It's a collaborative storytelling. You want your players to succeed, and you don't like it when they fail, but if you make those choices. Like I said, you're both the good and the evil. And if you forget this, you turn a very combative DM, which no one really wants to play with, and it just, we've seen it. We've had one DM who unfortunately forgot that, and I think he's gotten better by now, but well, I think I'll want. Now, another thing is, and some people when they play this game, there's the rule books, there's the rules, this is it. And like Captain Barbosa would say, the rules are more like guidelines. You can tweak, change, eliminate, add any rule to your game as you please, because that's the nature of this game. But, you gotta be consistent. If you're going to do that, you should tell your players, hey, by the way, so like one example, when I DM 5e, I usually say, if you want to take the Tavern Brawler feat and you're playing a monk or an unarmed fighter, that will actually progress you to the next damage die. So if you're level 1 monk and you took Tavern Brawler as a human, instead of being a D4 for your martial arts, you're a D6. You hit level 17, you're not a D10, you'd be a D12 or a 2E8 or whatever we decide upon. House rule, but something that I would say at the beginning of the game. So if someone was considering a monk and that feat, that, okay, I have a reason to take it.
Another example is, let's say, just movement on the map. So in some systems, you have, you're allowed to take one diagonal square only, and still counts as 5 feet. But if you take 2, suddenly it counts as 15.
Yeah, 1.5.
15. But, you know, some systems don't have that, and a square is a square, diagonal, whatever, what have you. But if it's a house rule and you implement that, any kind of house rule that you do, you gotta be consistent throughout the whole game. Because if like this week, oh yeah, I can totally make that work, and then next week the player sets himself up to make that move next round, and he's not allowed to do that, he's not able to do that because the rules have changed. Well, that, you know, again, spoils the fun of the inconsistency.
Yeah, I think also ruin immersion. Any thoughts on that?
Well, discussing changes. So discussing changes with your players is something that you should really do like forefront, and it's something that you should make sure is for things like item purchase planning, what kind of system you're using, point buy for building your characters. Make that known, and don't change that 2 weeks, a week out from when you're making your characters, rolling characters, your first session or your session 0, because I made that mistake when I first became like a DM or doing things related to being a DM, and not just with like our play group, but with other play group that I'm in. All of those players are acting very upset with me because I wanted to do a point buy like we were doing in our current campaign, and I was like, you know what? I think it'd be better if we just did a roll, and I lost 3 players, in that because I was inconsistent. So stand firm in it, make sure you are consistent.
But talk, communicate with players.
Yes.
Because if you bounce around the rules and you don't talk ahead of time, it can break immersion. And for some players, once you do that, they're done. they're checked out, they're going to just say, I'm going to derail the campaign. I don't care anymore. They didn't care, so why should I? And you don't want that. You want a nice, like I said, collaborative storytelling. And you brought up something that I'm going to kind of jump into real quick is session zero. This is, I think, some groups I've read and I've watched, sometimes they miss it, sometimes they skip over it. Sometimes they talk about it before and they just jump into it. Session zero, for those who may not be familiar with the term, or maybe a little bit, is where you come together on the first session and you're just building characters. You're going over the ground rules of the campaign. Hey, it's going to be a horror-heavy one. I'm going to use spiders. If you don't like spiders, keep that in mind. Might head to a phobia. Or we're going to do action-adventure, combat. And water, we're going to do exploration. Well, then maybe this campaign's not for you. Session zero will bring out any changes to the rules, a groundwork of what's to come, and so everyone's on the same page for the consistency, and helps us improve the immersion. So once again, rule number 2, you can change the rules, just communicate. Now, 5e really pointed out rule number 3 when you're building your combat encounters. But it's always been around in every edition. Even other systems that's not DMing, that's the action side. We've been in combats where we were curb stomping the enemy left and right, we're kicking butt, no problem, because there was more of us than the enemy. We had more abilities, more actions to take, therefore we could do more damage or more tricks. But then we've also done another side where the enemy had more and we were struggling. And it wasn't even a tough enemy. Something that we could do. Come on, you guys.
Knitting 3 seats?
You can find some, yeah. But yeah, so I mean, you've tried designing some encounters, and you've personally have seen. I know something I was telling you, the action economy is one of the most important things to keep in mind.
Yeah, because you can't get lost in the sauce because there's so many things that are thrown at you at once just from your players alone. Like you could have 4 players, and all of a sudden it's their action, and then it's finally you, and then you don't know what you're doing because you got lost in tracking 15, 16 different things.
Alright, let's say it's 4v4 and combat's going fine, right? You take 1 or 2 down, but then those 1 or 2 down are replaced by reinforcements up the stairwell that you didn't cover, and then now it's 6v4, and then those 2 go down, and they're replaced by reinforcements. Try to keep that in mind as well. That this is a dynamic game and things can change, but you also be realistic as a player and say, gee, if I'm attacking the High Overlord's personal tower, and we already know he has about 500 people in the area.
You don't throw all 500 people in the area at the party at one time.
Well, expect at least a couple dozen. Because, this is the High Lord's Tower, he has a bodyguard or 2 or 8, just around, because the big baddie does that.
If Joe Playdale III are four rounds away from the big BBG and his other general and the party, expect them to be there in 4 rounds, not 2.
Yeah, I think the point being you guys are making is that you can change the combat. Make it be realistic, like they did invade the enemy's territory. This guy has an army. It's not going to be a walk in the park for their players. You might take the right actions to make it more so, but it can change. But keep the balance.
Did you choose to cover the doors? No. Oh, well, there you go. That is your mistake. You probably should have done that.
Now, I think one thing that you mentioned on this that you wanted to talk about was when you do design an encounter, whether it be a puzzle, whether it be a social encounter, and most likely it's going to be a combat encounter, come up with ways to make it beatable. Not saying that every encounter should be, yes, they can succeed. No, because in that example, if they just walk in the front door, they're not going to succeed. But have options in case let's say it's a minor encounter, and it's gone south bad, and it's like, this is not what I want, they should have TPK. Have some options. Maybe a diplomacy check. Maybe a performance of, we're going to turn into a Scooby-Doo musical and maybe distract anyone when we sneak out with that. Or last, a hidden teleport option that we had. One player's like, well, I have to scroll out a lot. Hold hands, let's go. Give the party opportunities. Give them clues about what's to come. And when you're designing encounters, if you want to do the solo encounter, you're going to have to build around that because your enemy only has one turn. Usually that's where legendary action, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Concerning enemies having only one turn, are you the kind of DM that has all of your enemies go on one turn, or do you sometimes separate all for it?
That generally will be based on how you decide. Like for me personally as a DM, I like to, if I have, let's say, 7 or 8 individuals, what I'll end up doing is I'll chunk those 7 or 8 individuals into like parties, and then I'll roll their initiative separately. So like two members of this party will have initiative 20, another 2 will have initiative 12, and then the last one will get on barrel with initiative 1.
But you also got to bear in mind the strength of those enemies while you do that. Because let's say you have just standard, mediocre enemies, but you got 4 of them. In a 4v4, let's say you guys go, you all pick your own enemy, you smack them, what have you. But then, well, I'm a DM. I, being a clever individual and my mercenaries are experienced, I'm going to have all of my mercenaries curb stomp the wizard who has like 12 HP. So, yeah. So, it definitely benefits to stagger, or at the very least, roll for it. And if, let's say they all go 4-on-4 anyway, don't intentionally kill your party unless they really deserve it.
To actually elaborate on that question a bit, if you have all the enemies go at once, and not for smaller groups, it's not that bad, but it turns into sort of slog fest where the players just sit back, okay, and that one goes, that one goes, and that one goes, and you're just like, oh yeah, I can take the hit, okay. And meanwhile, you're sitting there just doing all this bookkeeping, and then finally, okay, now it's your guy's turn.
I asked because I made that mistake recently, doing a little bit of home brewing.
It happens. One trick I found when I was running a campaign, and I had a boss fight. If you ever played Majora's Mask, the Swamp Temple boss, I recreated that. But I had his summons. I had pre-rolled those onto a chart, and I made them minions in Europe 4th edition. They're one-hit kill, but they still do normal damage. So they're fun for like just area effects to kind of clear out enemies, make the players feel powerful, and it kind of keeps it dynamic. But I had pre-rolled it, and I made sure that they were, even if the roll said one thing, I stacked them. So I knew that the players would at least speak throughout that, and it would be a back and forth with the players and the enemies. It's more interesting, it's more dynamic, and it also allows the players to better adapt to the situation. Instead of the player going, okay, okay, I'm going to do something, no, I got a mass skill, okay. And then it really helps, at least in our experience. We already went through it before, go ahead.
Yeah, so to continue on to balancing the encounters. So my first time DMing, I was super excited because it was cool. I just found my book of cursed items and traps, and I'm like, this is going to be the most awesome thing ever. My players are going to love it. And yeah, I mean, not so much. It didn't really work out. So if you, let's say your rogue gets like a trap, and they go and they're like level 1, and they go to activate this trap, and they just roll poorly and they happen to fail it. Now they're permanently blinded because they want to peek through the keyhole, and then have a needle behind it because it was a viciously evil book of traps and cursed items. So now they're level 1, permanently blinded. Clerics don't have the spell Cure Blindness until level 2 or 3. So, again, it was my mistake as a DM that I wasn't aware of that. I didn't pay attention to it. Yeah.
A lot of times the DMs will come up with these really neat ideas that you think this would be great, just like that. They're going to have fun, they're going to love it, and then it turns out players didn't really like it as much as you thought it would go. Or perhaps you have this idea of this really neat encounter, and in theory it's great, but then in practice,
yeah, you didn't really think it through.
Guilty.
Well, we all are one. It happens. You come up with something, then it doesn't always work out. In the case of early level traps, I would say, otherwise, you warn the players ahead of time through the in-game clues, or if you have to, guys, this is the Tomb of Horrors times 100. Will die, or worse. Be careful. If they still go in just like that, sorry, but I gave you everything I needed. You can also throw in maybe some healing items from a former adventurer corpse that might cure that blindness this time. But then they might go, okay, hey, don't give me the keyholes. Another rule that I've noticed that come up, and I've seen some DMs on that, I've read it online a lot of times too, is be specific, but only as you need to be. So one example, one of my buddies was running a game, and the players started asking questions that, while were amusing, but what's the gravity? How big is the world? The answer should have been, your character doesn't know what gravity is, or normal. It could be a times 100 gravity compared to us. Doesn't matter for those characters, it's normal. Because, go ahead.
I don't like to bring science, like science, physics, and math into my RPGs, my tabletops.
You mean a D&D game that's based on math? Shocking.
So I don't tend to answer those questions or answer them very specifically because there's no point. He's right. Why do you need to know the gravity? Are you going to do some sort of weird trick where you're launching one of your characters off the trebuchet and you need to figure out what his weight with the tensile strength of a rope is that's launching the person off the trebuchet? No, don't. You're doing something silly. Don't be specific with it.
It also prevents you from running yourself into a corner. So if you tell the players that, okay, here's the entire world, let's say there's just 4 land masses. That's it. You now have no room for expansion besides going across the plains, or you've been transported to a different planet. Now granted, when you do reveal stuff, when you do reveal information, you've firmly stated the Temple of Elemental Evil, for example, is at this location on the map. You can't just change that now, it's there. But up until that point, you can put that temple anywhere you want. Anyway, you could even say, you know what, we're not going to use that. I'm going to bring in the king of the giants.
King of the giants, yeah. Electric Boogaloo?
Yeah, but the player should only be asking, what is my character? And if they try to poke a little too much, you can go a little bit into it and say, look, your character would only know this, operate with this, and it also helps foster creativity, and like I said, it keeps the world open for you to adapt to the player's actions. Because you might say, okay, we're going to go here. Anyone who has DM or played in the game knows, you tell them that that's the direction to go, and they're going to go, what's over here? Or here, or here, or here, or here, or here, or here. We're going to ignore this. We're going to do everything but this. That doesn't make sense.
Side quests.
Yes. Which kind of brings us into less rules, but more of tools in your toolbox. Now, I just mentioned about the whole, you put that template word, illusion of choice. In my opinion, this is probably the most powerful and best tool the DM has. It's that you make the players think that they have complete control of what happens, they choose everything, and you're just adapting to them. When in reality, for example, they walk into a room and there's 3 doors in front of them. They have to choose, you only choose one door. Now you spent an entire week building this one encounter, and you're proud of it, so great. What if they choose the other 2 doors? Well, the trick is, no matter what door they chose, it went to that encounter. But the players got to choose. It was their choice to go through whatever door it was. You still got to do your prep time. They got to feel that they had complete agency. And it's not being deceptive, it is helping for, because DMs put a lot of time into. They got to build a pantheon in some cases, if there's any divine-based characters like clerics or paladins. You got to build up the villains, what they're doing, how they're doing it, the heroes' location, geography, the social, political climate, is it monarchies, are they tribes, is it a mix? What races get along, what races don't? You got all this to do. So this will help free up some of your time and be able to focus while still giving the players that illusion that they're choosing from all these options you've made. When in reality, you've only filled in 1% of that. You're just adding that as you go. Another one that comes up, I see this more recently online, people debating about fudging dice rolls. As many should know, that is pretty much where a DM will be, rolls a dice, and that could be a 2. Oh, the guy got 16.
So get this a lot because I'm the notorious bad roller of our D&D play group. It's like, I genuinely only roll like on the latter half of the die majority of the nights. So when I DM, I do this fudging dice rolls because otherwise if I make my bad rolling habits will come up in the middle of an encounter, and all my monsters are rolling ones and twos, and it's not very fun for me, but also for my players.
I think it's kind of
yeah, it's a broken beatdown, and I don't really prefer it that way.
Remember, you're telling a story.
that's it there.
Yeah. So one, with the illusion of choice, if you don't facilitate the telling of the story, then you're not doing yourself or your players any justice.
You're gonna walk away miles more. And with the dice roll, now granted, it doesn't mean that every single time you just say, you got a 16, 18, 20, there's a 5. Now granted, as wise DM once said to me, doesn't matter what the dice says, the DM decides what happens. In fact, I think in the original D&D, only the DM rolled dice. Is that right, Bill? Yeah. So for the longest time, players didn't even roll dice. The DM would just be like, okay, this happens. And a good storyteller would make the story they're going to be satisfied with how it goes, even when it's not so great or even when it is. Sometimes you just choose to roll out in the open and let fate be fate. But don't be afraid as DM to take control a little bit, and that's why you have the screen. In fact, when I ran a campaign for the first time in 5e, I had an opening encounter on a ship when they were going to this continent to adventure. And I had them just roll their characters, choose, and then I had a pirate encounter. Just so if they wanted to change characters, they could, because there were other people on the ship fighting. So they would like being the cleric because they happened to be a fighter instead. But what happened was, my cleric player, the enemy that attacked him, this cleric player had, I think, 11 hit points. No, he had 12 hit points. I hit him, I rolled damage, and I rolled 11 damage. And I was like, this is not going to help him decide whether or not to play a cleric. In fact, it might just tell him, I don't want to play this one. I want him to make a choice for better reasons. So I said, you take 2 damage. Even though I could have brought him down to the brink, but no, 2 damage. Yeah, you got hit, you dodged most of it, you blocked it with your shield. He felt good about it. He actually played the cleric pretty down until he had to move. And I felt if I had done differently and I just followed the dice, they would have lost their cleric player right from the beginning.
Inversely, make it thematic. So let's say this guy who you're playing against is a paladin. Fudge your crit, fudge max damage, or close to max damage. Make it seem like you're telling a story. Like, oh man, this guy's been training for 3,000 years and whatever portal where, and he's that big of a guy. Or he's that scary. Don't be afraid to go either way.
Now, another rule that I've is saying no. Sometimes the best answer to your players, whether or not they want to hear it, is no. No, you can't do that. No, you don't find that. No, it doesn't do that. And it's not you're being mean. It's that you control how powerful the players are. You control what they have access to. You decide when they come across legendary items or cursed items. If they go to a shopkeep and they decide that, hey, I have 80,000 gold because they conquered a dragon, got its sword. They have 80,000 gold to spend. But they're in a small little hamlet. Well, I have enough money to buy this thing. Yeah, but the hamlet doesn't have it. But I have enough. No. But you can hold on to it and maybe find someone with it. Which then leads them on a quest to go find this one item they're looking for. It may be a game-breaking item. It may be an item that right now would be game-breaking, but later on would be okay. Like Robes of the Archmage, a legendary item. If you got that 5, it makes the combat encounters a little easier. You give a vorpal sword to someone. That's going to be an instant kill for 20. You give some bag of beans, apparently, in any campaign from 5e. Just when you summon a mummy lord, that was pretty fun, actually.
It wasn't 1, it was 2.
It was 2, yeah. But don't be afraid to tell the players no, but don't say it every time. Work with them, because you are telling a story with your players. You want them to enjoy it, but you don't want it to get to the point where you're a pushover and go like, hey, can I have this? Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, and then if you have to take it back, they might be upset. It's like, Yeah, but dude, it's too powerful. I don't want to give it up. Okay, fine, it's depowered, but that's not fair. You don't want to be in that situation. And it's communicating with your players. If you are in that situation by accident, hey man, look, that item I gave you is really powerful. It's going to break the encounters for a long time. How about we tone it down a bit and make it where it's so many times a day, or it's 1 minute per day, and then over time it starts charging back up, and then you're at the level, it does what it's supposed to. Yeah, and you can make it a quest item too. Something else that comes up, and this is more the combat encounters, is adjusting your monster stats on the fly. In the monster manual and in books that have any monsters, you'll see all their stats and information, hit points, how hard they hit, how much damage they do, how accurate, special abilities, can they fly, can they burrow, can they teleport. Some encounters look easy on paper. Some don't turn out that way. I think one of the most well-known dangerous low-level encounter is the Basilisk. Potentially to petrify the entire party in game mode, because they don't usually have a way to undo. You got a question?
I almost had a party die from scourges.
Yep. Actually, my character
Just
almost
because
died
the
from
scourges
scourges.
were rolling on.
And
the characters were rolling
sometimes,
on.
yeah, and sometimes the DM, that's when you fudge and, oh, they missed. Or you could even just say to the player, re-roll that. There you go. Yeah,
Remind
I saw that.
Remind
And sometimes,
the
yeah.
characters of items that they have.
And sometimes that's all you gotta do to keep it going. And now, granted, you don't want to cheat them a victory or a loss at a critical moment where they earn it or both ways. But don't be afraid to say, if the combat's going on and on, and the players are like this, I roll ahead, oh yeah, it's not dropped yet. Maybe it's time to say, hey, you know what, that last hit actually dropped it. Even if they had another 100 hit points, the players clearly have the combat control, it's going to take forever. You just fast forward through it. Or, one of my favorite things, and it's a little bit lower on the list, the minion system. In 4th edition, I mentioned this earlier, there were creatures, a creature type where it would be the same stat block, except it had one hit. I mean, all you do is hit once and it dies. And there are variations, super minions, I think ultra minions. I've used them in 5th edition a lot. If I have a couple of enemies and the party's having a hard time on this one guy, but it's not going to kill them, I'll start putting a little talent. And then at some point, oh, 3 strikes. So like, yeah, that last hit, you hit him, you dropped him, his head explodes or he falls. Meanwhile, that guy probably had 200 more hit points, or 3, or 1, or whatever. But it helps keep the flow going because I know some of us, we only get a couple hours to play this game. And you want to make the best you can out of those couple hours. And sometimes you get more time, but sometimes you make fun. Any thoughts on that, guys? Just in monster stats or the minions?
Minion, or adjusting monster stats on the fly. Adjusting monsters in general is kind of more my groove, my shtick. I like to mash up monsters sometimes. Perfect example is on my first campaign with their one-shot with these guys, I had actually designed I made whites riding displacer beasts, but I made them in such a way where the displacer beasts were fused to the whites unless they made a strength saving throw on a melee, a successful melee head. And if they failed, they made detached. But up until that point, you had, I believe it's a disadvantage, you had 4% to hit the white and the displacer beast.
It's just advantage. It's just in 5e, it's just advantage, and then if you hit them, they don't take a turn to bring it back. Yeah, they're lower difficulty, unlike 4th edition where it was even odds.
But I adjusted them the way that they were because I set the party level at 10. Yeah, 10. So whites on their own and displacer beasts on their own are really not much of a problem. When you kind of throw them together with a little more hit points, it becomes a problem. I only felt like 2 in the whole setting. So like the fact that they were going to see them was rare to begin with. But these were monsters that I adjusted to make sure that they were able to.
You made it matter appropriate for what you were doing. Yeah, and you adjusted so it wouldn't be a curb stop against us, but it was still a challenge at least. And that's once again about adjusting the stats on the fly to better adapt to the party's composition we can do. Once again, not saying it's making it a walk in the park. Yes.
You guys had new DM started our group in the starter session. First night, you started like starting all over. As soon as we started competing, right into our first two goblins, we set up all goblins and that's
Did you get that good?
I can't hear you, Mike.
He set up all the goblins at max level. Why we were level 1 characters.
I got you. So like Max.
We just barely survived it. But then the rest of the campaign went by so fast because he gave me the idea of all the experience to level 1 characters. So our characters were from level 1 all the way to level 5.
Yeah, you were at level.
And all the rest of the battles.
We actually had been in a situation where we wanted to encounter that the book even said the players should have been able to do, but through some ingenuity, some lucky rolls, and some good strategy on our part, we pulled through. In regards to those creatures, like I heard some about max hit points and level and such.
Max level goblins.
Yeah, usually they have a much higher hit point pool. If you can, as a DM, just use the maximum hit points for a creature. This is kind of the point I was thinking about making, but if you offer that, if you're going to do that, you should offer players that instead of rolling for hit points, they get the max to balance it out. But that sounds like a potential, look, you win or lose, and then if not, you're going to start over and build some new characters. Not really fun in my opinion, but hey, sometimes it's refreshing. Yeah.
Speaking, he made a comment about how the players got all of that experience from beating such powerful enemies at level 1. Do you prefer games with experience, or do you prefer Milestone?
I was going to add a little bit, but so let's put a note in that real quick, and we'll come back shortly. Because I was going to cover that. Because I don't want to go too much in time. So kind of shoot real quick the last 3 points here. Go ahead.
Alright, 3 things I can think of. First is learn about kobolds. Second, learn about Tucker's kobolds. And third, add them to your game.
Yes.
That is it.
You would like a creator and you can see that.
I will look them up.
Yeah. All right. A couple of things left on here. Skill checks can help us off. So if you're in a tough combat encounter and there's some effect going on to prevent the players again, physically they got the attacks and they would succeed, but they're getting stuck behind something. You could always add in a puzzle effect where, oh, you could spin off the banister, get behind and get an advantage and get the weak point. Or like the persuasion, maybe convince them to look at you while your rogue gets in the right position and give you extra damage if you don't allow it. It's a way to incorporate the other elements of the game into combat in the situation. Layer actions, legend resistance, and legendary actions. These are special features in 5th edition that should only ever be used on bosses that are solo or potentially named enemies. What those are for when usually a solo where the action economy, the players have far more actions and the enemy has 1 round. But layer actions let you have other attacks in between. Legendary action do the same thing. Legendary resist say, okay, look, you didn't just cast banishment and the encounter in 1 turn. I save automatically, but they only get so many, which will be in the stat block on the monsters. Be wary of using that on other creatures, but I'm not saying you can't, just they can be very powerful in the wrong situations. The last little tool is modules. If you're just starting out, modules are a great place to just start and kind of stretch, kind of get into the groove a little bit because they're pre-balanced. They have all the encounters, social, exploration, traps, combat, and they give you a description of what to do, what to say, and let you kind of, like it guides you through it, and then you can alter it, tweak it as you go, or as you get more experience, or you can even take an entire module and put it in your world as something to find. I did that for a campaign where I took the Dawning Portal book, I took every dungeon and I put it as one of the major arc points in the story. I didn't understand the Doom Vault, and my players didn't get through that, and I was ready to get done with it because of how long that thing takes. But modules are a very good tool to have. So you mentioned leveling. I've been in games where I've mainly done XP leveling. I've done milestone leveling for some one-shots, and I've seen other groups that have done both. It really comes down to what do you prefer and what your group wants to do and come to agreement to. because there's pros and cons to both. Traditional XP is, well, if you defeat the encounter, whether through combat, whether through social, you're going to get the experience points and you can potentially level up. It can lead to video game grind, like the whole, I'm going to go kill 1 million boars in the forest to get to the next level, so I don't have to worry about being under level for this next encounter. Or we'll just go murder hope. We'll kill everyone and get all the XP. And as DM, you can say, no, you don't. No, you don't.
Those are still worth XP, Mike.
Milestone, of course, is where you say you don't get XP, but as you complete predetermined locations or points in the story, you will level. Usually this could be an arc. Like, hey, if you save the mayor's daughter and you got her out of that dungeon, one levels up. And the pro to this is it allows the players to focus more on, first of all, they learn their character's abilities at that point much better. And they can focus not so much on killing everything, but actually solving the problem, and sometimes in more efficient ways. But it can be at times where you're stuck on something and you're not leveling for a while, even though you may have killed 30 minor demons. You're like, hey, I should have leveled for that. That's a lot of XP, but we're not doing this. So pros and cons, and it's something on session 0 I'd recommend discussing if you're considering. At the end, you do have the ultimate decision on what you want to do with that. But it's usually better when you have an agreement with the players. Hey, I want to do milestone leveling. Are you guys cool with that? We can do that one-on-one, but I prefer to do it with this. Or I really want to do the normal XP. I don't like milestone leveling. Even though they might go, I love milestone. No. But those are pretty much the main tools as a DM that will help you do far better and get there. So yes.
I came across something recently that I thought was pretty cool. A DM makes the players write on an index card or something what their goal is for the future.
For the character.
Yeah.
Yes, that's actually
And then I just did it in my game. I told them, what are your meeting goals? And they all had separate goals. Some of them are in requirement, some of them not. I told them, okay, well, once you accomplish this goal, you're level 10. So they give them kind of an incentive.
That is actually the neat way to do that system. I mean, our current campaign, we're doing normal XP, but we made our characters one-on-one DM, sort of, each of our own characters have their own goals. Some are trying to undo a curse, mine was before trying to undo an out-of-control mutation that was killing my character, though right now it's been reset due to resurrection. Other characters are stuck in form, one character is just money, and the DM can use that to sort of bring those stories together. But I haven't heard of that, but that actually is really neat, and that's a great way to kind of utilize milestone leveling with a little more player agency. And that's great, and it fosters communication and more better immersion, I think. So it's actually excellent.
How do you guys like to handle players scheduling conflicts?
That classic problem.
So we have it as a rule in our group that in our current campaign, we will run unless 2 people are out. So we have 7.
We have 7 players.
7 players. So if one person's out, one of the usually whatever happens is like he will play for my character and I'm out, or Lou will play for our other friend who is right next to.
Yeah. It's not the same. We try not to do that on major critical points, like it's like about to be a boss fight, because you'll say, so we're running a one-shot this weekend. That's one way to handle it, is to have just maybe someone wants to try DMing, like, hey, do you want to try DM this weekend instead? Because we don't have everyone that we normally have, and I don't really want to do this next part without John and Susie, because this is crucial to their character. And I don't want to just left turn out of nowhere and go here instead. Because you want to keep the flow of the story, but scheduling is always going to be an issue, because real life and responsibilities do come in. I mean, we agreed upon Saturdays for us, but one of us always falls short of the stick on that. One of our players actually intends to open at a restaurant Sunday morning, so he's there 6 to 7, and we try to get done by 12, 1 at the latest. Sometimes he's going a little bit, it's great, and it's like, and
Some people have other things that they do during the
at one point I worked a weekend shift. I was working 6 to 6, and they're like, hey, we can only meet on Saturdays. I was like, wow, it's good stuff for me. But It happens. Sometimes you just get, someone's going to take the, well, all right, it's my turn. So you can find a day where it's awesome. But before you, okay, got a question back there.
How do you handle player versus player?
PvP. Generally,
Let them fight.
PvP, the problem with PvP is that it can end, unless both players are like, hey, this could be fun, it can end in one or both, otherwise their characters walking away, or even the players. Generally, you try to discourage it and say, well, let's try to RP this out. Or talk with the players, start to say, look, you guys are getting real tense, you're about to actually fist fight. We need to come up with a solution that's a bit more viable to continue forward. If you don't feel like your character can party with us anymore, this might be a chance to try a new character. Or maybe they're both in that same page. Okay, well, you guys, like you said, let them fight, and then you guys are going to fight. Whoever survives can save the party, everyone's otherwise dead or gone.
I'm just saying, everyone's got to sleep.
This is our road, by the way, so you see where that's coming from, yeah.
How do you handle metagaming?
Metagaming is also probably the other one of the most difficult things, because as you play this game enough, eventually you recognize a beholder's layer immediately. You know what dragons can do. You know that, oh, basilisks, crap, we have integration, we have reflective shields. Eventually, you know so much about the game that metagaming becomes inherent and almost impossible to avoid. The best thing to do is to try, at least in my experience, I try to refresh descriptions to surprise the players. And then if they start acting on things that their character doesn't know yet, I'll usually say, hey, give me a knowledge check to see if your character has heard about this. So one common example is trolls. They regenerate unless they take fire or acid damage. Most players know this. Character-wise, if you have an urban-dwelling character who's never been to the countryside or a swamp or the mountains, they may have heard of trolls, but never knew that fire and acid's the key. Now that could lead to an interesting roleplay session. Or you say, well, you've actually rolled for this. In your studies, you've come across, you're aware that fire and acid seems to be a key damage. You're not sure why, but everyone you've talked about says always use fire and acid. And maybe they learned why. Sometimes you gotta shut it down if it's going beyond just something like that. Sometimes players are like, oh, I know this enemy, I know what they do. Like, your characters know that. Your character's barbarian, you're not you don't have the college degree that has all this information.
You can say something.
Yeah. It's tough to handle. It's just, but that's where the communication comes in. If you communicate with players and try to kind of compromise, you can maybe come up with something that works. Go ahead.
Kind of still feel like a new player. Only maybe like 6 or 7 campaigns. A thought that was brought up in a group was possibly a simple campaign idea of having each of the players DM like 2 of their favorite roles. I have no idea how to DM. Do you have a piece of advice for like a confidence boost as even a new player to try and like own myself when I'm doing it or anything like that? I guess nerves.
Gotcha.
Do you want a serious answer or do you
Yeah.
want a joke answer?
No, I'm
serious
Okay,
answer.
so as a serious answer, just go into the mindset that you're there to have fun. You are there to learn. Yes, but you should also have fun, because at the end of the night, if you're not having fun and all you're doing is just rolling dice to see if you can do whatever it is you're doing to your party members, you're just gonna hate it. Yeah. So it needs to be fun for you. Joke answer: drink.
Yeah. Also, I mentioned earlier trying using modules at first, because they're set up already. It's a great way to just sort of follow along, and you can just change some things and kind of like ease your way into it a bit. And then actually, I've used the module before, and the players had no idea. They thought, "Oh, man, you really planned it." I was like, "Yeah, I planned it, and it was great." And really, it was just. Another one, was that I've seen DMs adapt to the player's actions, but through just putting out a confidence out and just adapting to it, you can actually play off that. Oh yeah, I've always had that. Wow, really? It's like, yeah. I mean, we're not going, boom. You gonna say something?
I would like to add to her question in the current answer. Let your players have a certain amount of responsibility for the game being fun too. It's not all on you, it's all of you. So involve them in the development of the game situation.
Actually, that reminds me of our trick, and I'll give you a question. If you want to do like a big battle, our DM did this a while back actually. We were protecting a small town, and there were town guards. So instead of the DM sitting there, all right, I roll for the 20 guards. He actually said, because we have 3 tables for the players. You guys control these 4, 2 melee, 2 archers. You control these 4, you control these 4. So we had our own characters, and then the table would decide what those 4 would do. Now, granted, one of our players immediately decided to give all these characters names, and then I did the same with mine, having on Power Rangers. And then it just turned into a fun little, actually, mid-combat RP session, which was hilarious.
Sydney and Shaggy ran away successfully after being figured.
Yep.
It was amazing.
There's another way to kind of, and also it balances the workload a little bit. So instead of you going, they're worried about that, you can worry about the other stuff. So, but.
Question, what is the best way to go about being DM? Like, I have a lot of people say, tell me to, go play as you go, build as you go. Or
prepare, improvise.
Prepare, improvise, which is like the better option.
Well, the true answer actually is, when you DM, you're basically trying to herd cats. So like earlier I mentioned how you'll have this one option, you prepared all week before, and the players are like, what's this? Oh, what's this? I didn't say that. With the illusion of choice, you can make preparations and still use it to an extent, but you should also try to work on improv, because we've had an entire session actually that our DM had not planned for, because we said, oh wow, look at, we're like a space campaign. We're traveling through hyperspeed. All of a sudden we get a distress signal. We stop. We find this battlefield with these 2 space carriers. Like one's a bug-looking one, one's crystal-looking one. They're crashed, and there's a beacon coming off one. We're like, wow, we should investigate that later. Because I was playing the road, I had money, I wanted to buy equipment, so I marked the coordinates and flew to the next system to go up our stuff. But he spent all week planning, metaphorically, and if he could, literally flip the table, gave us a fun little, and then finally said, okay, we're going to do this, and then improv an entire session that we still talk about amongst ourselves all the time. That would be the gnome Tony, the gangster who sold our barbarian 6 rounds for a gun. And then tested on the guy's personal bodyguard because he was rude to him.
My best piece of advice for that is prepare the world, but improv encounters.
Yeah.
So like have content ready for them to interact with like other NPCs and things, but if you need to like improv a couple of fights, be able to improv monsters. That'd be better.
Yeah, now as to that, just what I was going to mention actually, there are kind of like cheat sheets, like the DMG or the monster manual might say, this mummy or this wight has such and such attacks, they're worth such and such damage. Well, if you're level 2, level 4, level 6, 8, whatnot, the damage die can go up incrementally, and there are charts online that you can look up. Just say, oh yeah, you use CR10 encounter, boom, use these damage die, use these hit die, and then you can improv any encounter. Because to try and pull up 6 monsters and then develop a thing and pull all that out, really time consuming
And
overwhelming, so it's like, hey, if I know this is the stat box I'm going to use, it makes encounter draws like
Tell the space ball we're having trouble hearing him in the cheap seats.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Mike.
But yeah, generally it's a mix of both. But prepare what you can, but be ready to do a little improv. Like just have a few things in your back pocket, and then you can just pull them out, or just like, I'm going to make something up, and see what happens. I believe you had a question next?
Aside from doing milestones and things like that, is there a way to like rein your players in from being for those?
Consequences.
Punish them heavily for it.
So, a lot of, some DMs tend to forget about the most important thing, or not important thing, but one of the big things in their world, the infrastructure. Towns usually have town guards. Talons usually employ bounty hunters. You piss off the wrong person, they might actually go find the assassin guild and say, hey, I want these guys off the table.
Wrong stuff, that's kind
Yeah, but you induce a system of consequences. That, hey, you can do this, but it might blow up in your face. If you go around just threatening every shopkeep, well, they may not sell you one and they call guards immediately. You might get kicked out of that town permanently. If you're caught walking in, it's arrest on site or kill on site.
So let's say you're on a quest for Holy Grail, and then you don't know where it is, no clues, and in a bar, you just randomly grab a child, start shaking them and saying, where's the Holy Grail? Like, imagine, let's say you do that tonight after you go, to a bar from the car. There's going to be
There's going to be no
real
kids at the
life
bar.
consequences, and they're going to happen really fast.
Wait, I have to try to
It's also about the kids in the car, the situation. What are you in-game consequences help with that a lot. It really does. But you have to be consistent. If the enemies do stuff, there has to be similar consequences. One trick I used in my earlier encounters was that I try to have someone get away so that the reoccurring enemy would get intel on how the party operated. So that if they were reckless, the world would start hearing about these reckless guys and adapt.
Never leave survivors.
As something that I do in things is I implement a karma system. So let's say for every 5 good actions, you get rewarded with something. Nothing major, but for every 5 bad deeds you do, you get a punishment. It can vary depending on the severity of the thing. So like say you beat up 5 homeless individuals. Well, that's 5 karma points right there. And then
Well, there's 50. But any questions?
You guys use voices?
Some of us sometimes do. I've done it sometimes, but the problem is we get lazy and inconsistent. I have horrible Irish and sometimes live in Scottish and occasionally Australian somehow. Not quite sure how that happens, so I don't use that too often, but sometimes we do. Sometimes we give like a little bit of dialect, like a little accent to show that this area they tend to talk like that, and kind of try to get some more immersion. But it's not something you have to do. If you want to do it, it's great. You can build some skills with it. If you ever want to pursue voice acting, it's a good tool to practice with. And like I said, it can create more immersion and more lively world. But you don't have to do it. I know some people are like, I'm not doing voice. Never. Not going to happen. Okay, no problem, man.
There's some really good videos on YouTube that show how to do different voices without actually having to change your voice out, right?
Yeah.
Just
An excellent online tool to do so.
speaking higher or lower, or like faster tempo or slower tempo, or gruffy or louder or softer.
Come on, get to the dungeon!
Any other questions so far? We are definitely over. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. If you have any further questions, tomorrow at 12 o'clock, same room, we'll be having our Ask DM panel where myself, our primary DM, as well as some of our other DMs, sitting here answering questions from a DM perspective. Feel free to come by, and we'll answer what we can within that time allotment. If you catch us outside, we'll answer questions still. We have advanced DMing provided that same night at 6 o'clock, and then Sunday we have a character death panel, kind of going into, hey, the character guide, here's things you can do next to better implement a new character, and how to take it personally. Thank you very much. You guys enjoy it.